Santa Ana Police Chief David Valentin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to spend this next 30-minute one-on-one interview really doing a deep dive on the Santa Ana Police Department, trying to learn about what's going on. We're going to talk about a lot of the good things here at the department, a lot of policing that maybe the general public is not aware of. And then we're going to talk about some of the bad, because obviously, Chief, to get to the good, to learn about the progression and the understanding of how you've gotten to where you are, we need to take this in sort of stages and understand what's going on. So having said that, I want to give you a list of what the critics are saying, nothing you probably have not heard. You attack this list any way you want. Let me read, if I may, sir. Sure. You've heard the argument. We've been working on the story for several months. We talked to a lot of people. They still feel there's a problematic history, for lack of a better word, with law enforcement in this city. They cite things like cop versus community mentality, excessive police abuse, misconduct of officers, racial profiling. Although that's interesting, we have to talk about when you have a police force that's so heavily Latino, policing a Latino community, is there really racism? We're going to talk about that. Certainly questionable cop on citizen shootings and killings. You've heard the stories, the civil rights violations. I've reported on them for years. These multi-million-dollar legal settlements, lawsuits, for example, with the ACLU. I interview the attorneys about gang injunctions, about deaths, and the public distrust with SAPD. Having said all that, thank you for allowing me to set this foundation. The floor is yours, sir. Attack this list, as it were.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. And, we have a complex history, like many communities, but I think it's important, as you opened up with, what has occurred and what are we doing right? We'll talk about, the challenges and the gaps and opportunities, but what are we doing right? So the approach is that we are in the people business. And so, when I look to hire an officer, whether it's a recruit as a new officer or a lateral coming from another police department, I need them to understand that we're in the people business. The vast majority of the folks that make up our city are good, hardworking people trying to get from point A to point B. And then there's a small percentage of the community that are opportunists, and they attack and focus and target victims in our community. And so that's why we need good public safety. I think there's a lot of historical when it comes to where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. I can share a little bit about since becoming chief in 2017. I was faced with 67 police officer vacancies, some 14%. And the response times for emergency calls for service was very high. And so we had to have a strategic plan to address that. I didn't assume anything. I've been here my entire life in Santa Ana, over 31 years in the police department. And so I took the time to listen to folks and what was working, where we needed to go in terms of recruitment. So fast forward, we actually make a concerted effort to hire folks from the Santa Ana community. You see the increase in diversity across all ranks and levels, and that's because we went to our own backyard. Santa Ana College is a community college here in our community. So asking the questions of when was the last time we walked the halls and had conversations and let people know that we're human as well, and we wanted to be part of our police department, our police family. And we've hired people from the community. We've hired folks that come from the various high schools here in the community. And so that's always good to see. With regards to violence, in the early 90s, I think the height of our murder rate was 97 murders. That's a lot of killing for 27 square miles. And so that really turned when we invested at a higher level in community policing. This goes back to the 1970s with Chief Ray Davis, who saw the value in having officers and our civilian support staff get out of their police car and engage the community to establish relationships so that they serve as our eyes and ears. Fast forward in taking over the police department in 2017, it's something that we had gotten away from. So I didn't reinvent the wheel. I looked at, returning back to the basics, what works. And so officers were encouraged to have the ability to get out of their police cars and have conversations with our community. It could be crime specific, but it also could be about school. It could be about their families. It could be about, the neighborhood event that's going on, a quinceañera, Dia de los Muertos, whatever it is. I think the more opportunity there is for officers to engage, the better. And so that's, we're in the people business. We encourage engagement. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're still focused on what I refer to as traditional policing. And so our policing philosophy today and our approach is dual. It's community-based engagement and traditional policing, because we can never get away from traditional policing, because there are those that target innocent victims. And so the officers are encouraged to take good affirmative steps, but also be able to articulate what it is they did and why. And so for the public, when it comes to trust, this is something that is at the forefront across our country today. We've lived through this tragic incident involving George Floyd, Minneapolis in 2020, and then what has occurred since then. I think what's important is for the community to know that we are invested as a partner. And again, it's more than just lip service. You have to demonstrate that you're willing to engage the community that we're hired to serve. And so one example is our Family Justice Center. So we still today, in 2021, are the only police department that has a Family Justice Center co-located within the police department. Now, if I would have listened to all the naysayers, this vision would have never become to fruition, because the feedback was the community will not come to the police department. They will not come to seek services. And we now know that that is not true. That's not true because of the investment in community relations. We have serviced countless people in our community through the pandemic, ensuring that we provide support services through the court process and otherwise. So I think we need to always look at how we can do things better. And then we need to listen. We need to do, I know I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but we need to listen twice as much as we talk. And that begins with relationship building in our community.
So with that relationship building, Chief, is it difficult to walk that fine line when your department, the good folks on the rank and file have done so much to improve this community, yet you're bombarded with articles, let's say from Voice of OC or the Los Angeles Times or the Orange County Register, again, talking about all the legal settlements or the problems with the union or police abuse or cops being too tough on citizens or lack of transparency? How do you walk that fine line? Because these are criticisms of your department that people in your community have a lot of conviction about, as you know.
Yeah, so I think it's addressing the issues head on. So as a police chief, it's important that the men and women of the police department hear directly from me, and they hear the concerns of community members, and that then I take that information and communicate back and educate the community as well. During this era of heightened criticism, if you will, I have received countless phone calls, messages, emails, letters of support. They want to see officers do good police work. They also want to make sure that it's done appropriately, it's done within the law, and it's done respectfully. There is nothing better than to see an officer that has to engage in some enforcement action, and that person that's, let's say, for example, going to jail, that they have to fulfill that responsibility, that they turn around and tell the officer, thank you. That's a level, that's a measure of dignity and respect that we encourage officers to engage in. And I think it's also about accuracy in information, is sharing as much information as we can with the community. As a field sergeant, I used to tell my officers, if you have the opportunity, if the situation is stable, take the time to share with mom, dad, or grandma the why, the why of what occurred, why you had to take certain police action. It goes a long way.
Speaking of taking police action, I sometimes make friends, I make enemies. I make enemies with my liberal friends in the media because I, with great conviction, say 99% of cops are good, decent, brave men and women who put their life on the line to keep our community safe. I make enemies with those on the right who say, well, you're not giving cops enough credit because by saying 1% are bad, well, then you're labeling everyone. Yet with that said, when you see a cop that has had bad behavior or done something wrong, how do you personally handle that, Chief?
So I always want to look at it not only as a police chief, but as an individual person from society. So no one dislikes more a compromised officer than those good officers. And so it's my job to make sure that we address those behaviors and, to the best of our ability, either change behavior or remove those people from the organization. One of the police reform bills that was on the table that did eventually get passed was decertification of officers. And as a police chief, I supported that effort because every industry has a certification process. Police did not in the state of California. And so now we have that in place so that you don't have problem officers leaving one organization and going to another.
I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast that some of the mistrust that some of the folks in the community here in Santa Ana have are sort of the fact that there's this cop versus a community mentality or some racial profiling. Talk about that because, again, as I said earlier, it's an interesting dynamic. Yeah,
so we're a very diverse workforce, and it's not just gender or ethnicity. Here in Santa Ana, there's some 85 different languages and dialects spoken. So just recently, we had an officer designated as official sign language interpreter. He had that background, and so we look to diversify the workforce. And when we're talking about profiling, people are taken back when I say, yes, we actually do profile. We profile behaviors, not ethnicities solely. So I think that's important.
Talk more about that. Elaborate on that, because the assumption is always that some cops target people because of their color or how they look. Delve into that for me.
Yeah. So for example, if the officer is responding to a robbery that just occurred, and it's the suspect's described as a male white in his 50s, male Caucasian in his 50s, the officer probably shouldn't be stopping the African-American teenager, 16 years of age approximately. So we're actually profiling that factor, that variable. But again, it has to tie with criminal activity and not solely detaining people, stopping people because of ethnicity or their race. So that's one example. And it's interesting when I've had dialogue with folks on this issue, because officers do profile, but they're profiling behaviors and variables. Race may happen to be one of them.
Then why do you feel some young Latinos in this community believe they are being targeted, or they believe they are being racially profiled if they're simply walking the street or they're driving in their car?
Well, that's an interesting one there for me. I grew up here in this community, and I will tell you, I was stopped by the police repeatedly, and each and every time I was stopped, I had to be stopped. In fact, that's probably what led me to this chair here, having our conversation. I think it's again having to do with why officers are taking the action that they're taking, and oftentimes there's the opportunity to share that information with family. So again, I'll refer back to myself. When I was stopped by the police, that information was shared with my mother, my grandmother, and they weren't happy, but at least they were told the information, right? And so that's key there. We're not in the business of detaining people, taking enforcement action solely based on race or ethnicity. We take action based on behaviors and variables that are related to crime or suspected crime.
I'm just going to go out on a hunch and say, I'm guessing your mom and your grandma were probably tougher than any cop you faced.
Absolutely, absolutely. I could be returned back home and knock on the door, and I wasn't worried, about how I got there with the officer. I was worried about what was behind the door. So yeah, absolutely.
I hear you. Let's talk about what has been sort of a theme with this police department over many years. Should there or should there not be a police oversight committee, maybe a citizen committee, if for at the very least to have better accountability, more personal responsibility from your officers?
So police oversight is obviously, again, one of those topics that's being discussed broadly across the country. I belong to various executive police forums that really research this area. And so not only is it a focus area interest of mine, but I want to see what best practices are out there in our country. And usually what you've seen, at least in the Southwest and in California, police oversight is implemented following some major incident or incidents. For example, in the city of Oakland, they have a very robust oversight commission with investigatory and subpoena power. Why is that? They had an unfortunate period in their history where officers were committing broad-based crimes in uniform on duty. And so that is very different than our reality here in Santa Ana. We have not had broad-based police corruption. Now, having said that, is there value to taking transparency to the next level? And that's really what police oversight is. I believe there is. I believe there is. So long as it's tempered, measured, and purposeful. It cannot, we can't get into, a witch hunt perspective. We can't get into this assumption that all officers, engage in alleged misconduct, because that's simply not the case. We are harder on ourselves than the public will ever be. We have a very robust internal affairs process here in the police department, and we encourage anyone to, document and submit complaints if they feel that they were disadvantaged in any way. So I think there's value to police oversight. There needs to be a very focused purpose behind it. And so here in Santa Ana, there's been 3 different periods where there's been this, we need to do it. And I think it's looking at, what is the intent behind it. And so, as we're coming out of this, 2020 and currently 2021 timeframe, I think it's a good opportunity to look at what will work here in our city.
Chief, is there enough transparency with your department here in this city? Sometimes, sadly, the department loses in the court of public opinion because when you talk to folks on the street, they seem to believe that they're sort of not in the know, that there's things going on here that they don't know about, and it gives the perception that, you used the word earlier, corruption or something wrong is happening. Could you be more transparent? Is there a way you could let the public know a bit more about what's happening in their own backyard?
As an industry as a whole, we can always do much better when it comes to transparency. And it needs to be, it's like a bank account. You're making deposits, and those deposits have to be on a regular basis, not when there's crisis, not when there's a question about accountability or police tactics or an incident, a critical incident. So that's got to be an ongoing effort, and it's a focus of ours. And so, for example, on our website, I want to make sure that it's timely, it's updated. Nothing worse than going to a department website and it's old, it's stale information. We have information on there about critical incidents, officer-involved shooting data, and we also have the investigative protocol process on officer-involved shootings and in custody deaths. It's an area that people have a lot of questions about, and we are the only agency in Orange County that has that forward-facing on our website. It answers a lot of questions for folks.
So let's really clarify even further. So to be clear, Chief, what can you tell the public and what can you not tell the public? I think that would give some sort of knowledge of, that will give information for your citizenry here in Santa Ana.
Sure, great question. So there's, from my perspective as a chief, there's really 3 areas that we have to ensure that we protect, and maybe eventually you can provide additional information, but 3 areas. The first is any current criminal investigation. We can't share that information because of concerns of people involved. Any administrative investigation. So when an officer is accused of alleged misconduct, that investigation, the contents of it, are confidential to that employee. And then anything having to do with tactics. If we have a barricaded suspect, the manner in which we're going to approach that situation and hopefully de-escalate it and bring resolution, we don't want to share that tactical information. Other than that, though, and when you really sit back and think about it, there's a whole world regarding police work that can be shared. And so we have taken the opportunity to identify what those areas are, continue to provide that information. I talked to police executives from across the country, and they'll tell you that it's an area that needs continued focus. Some police departments are just now coming around to this whole arena of community-based policing, community engagement. We have that platform as a way of doing business here.
Tough question. I have to ask it anyway. No surprise to you that there's been quite some controversy with you, with the department and the police union. Where are things now with your police union and you, Chief?
Thank you for the question. So I have had the great honor to serve as the chief here. I will continue to do that. I'm hired to do a job on behalf of all the good men and women of this police department and the community members. The police union issues that the public are just now becoming aware of are really centered on, its leader and a few folks. And so I would really look at, what the issues are. First of all, I think the public needs to understand that the police department is not inclusive of the union. There are a variety of different labor groups here that represent, that are part of the police department. And so they're separate. What I can tell you is that I will continue to focus on leading the organization. I have a 5-year strategic plan in place that takes us through 2024, and I have initiatives already identified until at least that time.
And that past no confidence vote against you does not deter that conviction of yours?
Absolutely not. I have received countless calls and letters and notes of support from the community, from the men and women of this police department, and frankly, police executives from across the country.
2 last questions about policing, and then I want to find out about who Chief David Valentin is. First question, we've got to talk about homeless. Got an urban metropolitan city in Santa Ana, hundreds of thousands of people living here, tremendous homeless population here, sadly. I've done enough stories over the years to know about this. Sometimes homelessness is criminalized, other times it's not. Could it help if your department, your cops had, let's say, for example, therapists or social workers or someone to sort of aid and assist in helping diffuse a situation, be it a domestic disturbance or a homeless situation?
Absolutely. As the police industry, we're one of the most visible forms of government, signs of government out in the community. And it's a kind of a path of least resistance to have the police address everything. But the question is, are the police the most appropriate to handle the homelessness issue? And so my position is that we are not. We are a vital partner. We recently, the city council approved an expanded contract with a nonprofit, which would pair community workers with officers that are dealing with homelessness out in the field. And so that's the best approach. Being homeless in and of itself is not a crime. Some people engage in criminal conduct, and that's where you need the police to provide that support. But the vast majority are dealing with mental health, are dealing with substance abuse. Some are literally just down on their luck, one paycheck away from homelessness, and then they remain there. So we've had extensive success partnering officers in working in a non-traditional role. Years later, we see success stories where people that have been placed in long-term supportive housing reconnect with their officer that made that connection for them. And it's really why we're here, is to make a difference and help folks. But it's the other reality is, in following this area, it's really a systemic societal piece. It's a financial piece. And there's a whole host of factors. And so, again, the police are not the most appropriate to be the point to handle and address and resolve homelessness. We are clearly a vital partner.
We have spent most of this interview, to your credit, answering tough questions, talking about the bad. I want to spend our remaining minutes of this interview talking about the good. We live in this new era of social justice, as it's being termed. What are your priorities going forward? What are some of the positives here? What are you working on? Because I do want folks in this community to know about the good things, not just the bad things, please.
Recently, we announced a robust employee wellness program, which focuses on a variety of different areas for the men and women that are delivering police services. Our folks can experience long-term stress that can impact not only their professional lives, but their personal lives. So we want to make those investments, and we've put that in place. We have a customized app that employees, their families, and even retirees can access for 24/7 confidential support. That's important. And then the other piece is to continue to expand our community engagement. We build a police department on frontline policing, make sure that we're handling calls for service, emergency calls for service. But then beyond that, what else can we do? And that goes to sharing with the public what our priorities are based on conversations that we've had with them. We don't ever want to assume that this is what we should be doing. And so those can change, and they in fact do. But I think it's important to continually listen to the community, understand what's impacting them, and then shift the organization, have it be a fluid piece so we're responsive to them, which is why we're here.
You are proud of your department. You are proud of your officers. What led you to be a police officer when you were young?
Yeah, so most people in our industry are, they come from a family of law enforcement or public safety, and I do not. In fact, the opposite is true. I have family members that maybe aren't on the right side of law. And growing up here in the city, I was a pallbearer to 2 murders involving drive-by shootings of other, friends that I grew up with. And so, in talking to my mother and their mother, they pleaded with me to be different, do things different. And I took that to heart. I met some good mentors along the way, and that's what brought me into police work.
And in our final remaining minute, what message do you want to give to your community that possibly the folks in this great city of Santa Ana do not know, whether it's about you, your department, or policing in general?
So the number one piece that I want to leave the community with is that we are focused on community first. It's not about me. It's not about an individual officer. It's our collective focus on community first. What does that mean? It's more than just words on the wall, and you see the messaging throughout the organization. When you walk into the police station, you see it prominently displayed. Officers that go out on the street every night see it at the forefront of the room. It's even posted in the jail. People in our jail are part of our policing community. And so community first is our focus today, and we'll be moving forward.
Santa Ana Police Chief David Valentin, thank you so much for this one-on-one interview.
Thank you.